seriously, if you want, come up front. Then you don't have to even go to the mic to shout a question at me. You can just shout it right from the front row. My name is Ori. I'm the group program manager for the Live Developer Platform. You should think of my job as sort of waking up every morning and thinking about what we could do to delight developers with the huge, huge platform we run in our data centers in the sky. You'll learn a lot about it today, what it does, why we think it's hugely important. We've been largely keeping it under the radar. You'll see a lot more coming from us towards later on this year. And today we're going to spend the hour talking about live services, live framework, mesh services, what they mean, what you can do with them, why they're super interesting, and how you can actually start playing with them today. Before we go too far, let's spend just a couple of minutes setting very high-level context, give you a bit of background about why live services exist, what they're really all about, what are the apps they power, and what kind of usage they get today. You know, a few years ago, if you kind of look at the trends the industry has been going to, particularly in the consumer space, right? This massive amount of innovation and development going on in hardware, in devices, in networking, whether it is innovation in the PC space from just the experiences you can have on the PC, whether it's netbooks or so many laptops being shipped out these days, lots of interesting digital lifestyle devices, media centers, mobile phones, PVRs, Xbox consoles, iPhones, all these really interesting pieces of hardware that are designed to really enrich our day-to-day digital lifestyles, as we call it. Even my mom, which I literally think about my mom every day, not just because I love my mom, but as a consumer, she's really sort of embodies the target audience that we think about and talk about every day when it comes to sort of powering next-generation experiences. And this conference, if you haven't noticed yet, is really about building killer experiences for consumers and enterprises alike. And so with this tremendous amount of innovation, you can look at this, at each of these icons essentially and think, most of these guys are connected to the internet at birth, as we call it. But most of these devices really are not aware of anything else that's really interesting to me as a consumer. They're not aware of each other. They're not aware of all the data I care about, the people I interact with, the services I use every day. And that's kind of a problem. It's, to some degree, in the last few years, there was more innovation in this space in hardware than has been in software platforms to really enable us to build killer experiences for end users. And we'll talk about what that really means in a minute. And so if you think about the three core platforms, if you will, not necessarily the digital picture frame platform, but the PC, the phone, and the web, Microsoft has been huge at, we started at the PC space, really with the PC operating systems. We grew to the web, to servers, of course, the phone. And now there's a new element of this platform that's becoming more and more critical to us every day, and that's the data center. So think of it as the fourth platform, so to speak, running these massive data centers that very few companies can afford to run. You'll see why in a moment. And live services, in general, our motto is synchronizing life, but live services are fundamentally about providing you a platform that connects your PC, phone, web, data, devices, applications, and people, and helping you deliver consumer experiences that sort of really rock. And we'll talk about what that means. So while I do think about my mom, obviously that's not my mom a lot every day. It could be my brother, I suppose. But if you step back for a moment, take a Zen moment, and think about what are the things that make up our digital lifestyles, we really break it down into 4 dimensions. First of all the devices we use every day. Even my mom was like the least technologically inclined person in the world, has about 5 of these, right? She has a PC at home, a PC at work, a mobile phone, a digital camera, which is a relatively new addition, and this Comcast-like DVR box. She has all these devices. They don't really talk to each other. Kind of hard to manage. Of course, on each of these devices, you run a bunch of applications. Some you use web applications. Some you use rich client applications. So I've got all these devices that I run all these apps on. Sometimes I use the same app on multiple devices. And of course, this new dimension to software in the last few years, social, has become a pretty important, integral part of our digital life. That means I want to share stuff with people, whether it's a 1 to a million style share like on MySpace or Facebook, QQ, Twitter, that kind of style, or just I want to share with 5, 10 of my closest friends and family my photos or something like that. So I've got all these devices, all these apps that run on them. I want to share and work with all these people and collaborate. And of course, all the data I own. And the data, again, is sprinkled across all these devices, apps, and shared with multiple people. And that's a pretty hard thing to manage, right? It's tough to manage both your devices, tough to manage the apps you use, tough to manage the data you use, and of course, tough to manage your social graph, so to speak. And so one of the things we think about every single day in live is how do we take this chaos and essentially turn it into order and really put together a platform that enables you to, from the get-go, program against these new elements that really matter. It's almost, think of the abstraction layer now is much higher than where it was 15 years ago, right? Where then we were helping you really program against, file system, network drivers, GDI, and now we're trying to, the concepts that you want to program against every day are just different. Those things don't really matter as much anymore. And the hard things are these 4 dimensions. So what we'll talk about today is the platform that we're putting together that really enables you to build software that takes advantage of these dimensions and deliver the types of experiences that users expect when they're using data, devices, apps, and people. Now, this platform is not, while it's relatively new as a concept for developers, it's something we've been working on for a while. And it's built upon some of the existing infrastructure we have around our identity services, directory services, communications and presence, user storage, and these 4 new pillars essentially embody the first step we're taking to help deliver this platform for software plus services apps, software on the client, services in the sky, help connect your application to users and their devices, and really integrate both cloud and client capabilities. Now, before we go too far into it, I thought I'd show you just a quick example of what is an app how do you take an app, or what does an app look like that you use today as a sort of standalone app and really add those 4 dimensions to it. And for that, I thought I'd use something that I personally use every day. I actually picked a rich client app on purpose and show you the web and sort of those 4 dimensions across this app. And I picked Media Center. Now, the challenge with me, how many people here have ever used Media Center? Good, that's why you're at MIX. You're the right target audience. How many people actually use the Media Center every day? Good. I use Media Center every day. Love this thing. Just wait until you see Media Center on Windows 7. You're going to be floored. It's phenomenal. Now, the challenge with a little promotion there, the challenge with Media Center for me is that I actually have a lot of devices that we manage in my household. And even though we might not be a typical household, in a few years we might be. Like we have literally north of 20, 26 devices that we manage daily. And so with Media Center, today the way I use it, it runs on 1 machine in my living room, and you have to be sort of in front of it to do anything useful with it. And what I want is, really the way it should work, the guide should be available to me on any device I use, including my phone or on the web when I'm away from my PC, or even at work when I remember I forgot to schedule a show. The shows should be everywhere. My friends should be able to see what I'm recording. I should be able to see what my brother is recording. I want to see what's going on with this sort of style media across people, across devices, and potentially in multiple apps as well. And so this guy in the Media Center team actually wrote the app I'm going to show you. And let's go ahead and split the screen. I'll show you it running on 2 different machines. On this machine, I'm going to launch a couple of apps that we've written for this demo. Let me actually get those fired up. And we'll talk about what they do. There we go. So we have Media Center running on a rich device on 1 screen. We have an app we wrote that's actually a Silverlight application that runs from a website. In this particular case, it's hosted in our CTP, so it's loaded from there. And we have an app that's actually running on my desktop as a Silverlight out-of-browser application that you saw Scott Guthrie announce this morning. And the idea is that I can go to my Media Center and look at the guide. I can go up to a website, any website that's hosting this app. Currently, again, you can only host it in the CTP, but you'll be able to host it on your own sites as well. And if I go and let's go and find some interesting show. We've got Arthur. That sounds like an interesting show. So I can browse this app. I can browse the guide anywhere I go. If I'm in an airport kiosk, I can hit record on this show. And what you'll notice is at my Media Center at home, now that show is being recorded. And what actually happened here, the web app essentially put a little blob in the cloud that says, hey, please record this show in the guide. There was a notification sent to my Media Center that picked it up, looked up in the guide, is this a valid show? Said, yes, I'll record it, send the notifications back. The web app got a notification that now the device is recording it. And of course, if I go now to this application, well, hasn't gotten it quite yet. But this app is running on a different device, right? It's running actually off of what we call our local runtime. It's actually not connected to the cloud directly. It's connected to the local runtime. That data will get at some point synchronized to this device. And this application, even though it's an out-of-browser Silverlight app, will still get this notification, pick up this piece of data, and be able to work with it locally. Now, and actually, let me show you another part of this app. If I go to my phone, that's connected. We also have a guide that runs on a Windows mobile phone, and you can actually browse to different shows on it. The guide is synchronized locally as well. You can see the Arthur show being synchronized at 3 o'clock. And the interesting thing about that, again, like on a mobile device, the last thing you want to do is sitting there polling the cloud all the time. The data is synchronized in the background to this device. It gets a notification in the app. It can show the guide, work with the guide, work with any, not just metadata, but any physical data like the show itself, if you chose to synchronize it across your devices, is accessible. Now, if you go back to the web app, on the right, what you'll see, there's a pane that has sort of what devices this app is being synchronized to, potentially news events related to it. So members of my family I share this application in the media center with can see what shows are being recorded, where there's conflicts, again, accessed from a browser, any device, and really any type of application. And so the point there is, really you want to take, even if you take an existing app, not even building a new style of application. Let's go back to a single screen, please. Is that virtually every application, every type of software experience I have day to day, you really want it to take on those 4 dimensions. There's hardly any app anymore that really lives in this sort of isolated boundary that runs on one machine, not really connected to other things. Even check out the games you use today. Most of the experiences you'll have on Xbox. It's hard for me to think of a useful software experience that shouldn't span devices, shouldn't span the cloud, shouldn't span my friends, my social graph, and other types of data and apps that want to connect to it. But, to be completely honest, it's okay, you could be brutal and give us this feedback. We have not done a great job as sort of industry-leading companies in the software world delivering platforms that really enable you to build these kinds of apps really easily. If you wanted to do one of those apps today, and we'll go through the work items of what it takes to build something like that, it is a huge amount of effort, including potentially running your own data center. The guys at the Media Center team, it's actually one guy that wrote this app in the Media Center team, built the whole thing in 2 days. Right? He built a little guy that pumps data from the Media Center guide into our local runtime. We take care of all the synchronization, sharing, permissioning, peer-to-peer, all that. He built a little Silverlight front end that runs online. We gave him the host to run it on the client. And in less than 2 days, he was essentially done. Typically, this one might take you weeks or months. And so when you think about live services and the kind of things that you really need to be done properly at a platform layer, we talk about live services as the set of building blocks that handle data and applications, resources that really enable you to connect to this massive, massive audience that we have in live. Specifically today, and these are services that generally run in the background so you don't see and feel them every day. But to give you an example, our identity services today do about 1.6 billion authentications a day on the identity service alone. We have almost 400 million installs of our client suites that connect to the cloud on Windows. We have over 500 million active users of live services, not total registered, but actual active users. Those 500 million people have roughly, I think, north of 40 billion contacts in terms of the social graph span. The number of people that they're connected to through their address book is enormous. We store ungodly amount of petabytes of their storage, which we can't actually share publicly. And at any point in time, there's roughly today north of 320 million active users of our relay network. Think of that as what backs Messenger. And at any point in time in the world, if you froze the network, there's probably between 35 and 40 million active relay connections going on at any one time. These are massive. They run in data centers all over the world. They cost billions of dollars to run. And today we use them for our own applications, and our goal is to turn them into a platform that you can use in your own apps so you don't have to build such massive services. The 4 pillars, again, that will live on top of these to expose our platform for developers are around user management, data, devices, and applications. Now, when it comes to live services, think of that as sort of the back end of what powers it all. And the way that you as developers will be programming against live services is using what we call the live framework. And there's 2 specific new pieces that we're introducing with live framework. One is the live operating environment. Think of it as a runtime. It's very similar to the execution engine in CLR. If you think of the EE, the execution engine in CLR is abstracting the underlying Windows services, file system, I/O, network stack, TCP/IP, GDI, et cetera. You can think of the live operating environment as abstracting all these massive services that we run on the cloud and on the client from you, so you can have one single, consistent, coherent programming model that we expose over the live operating environment. This programming model is all about providing you sort of a unified view into live services. It's open and interoperable using web standards and supports, of course, the 3 hero platforms, if you want to call them that, the PC, phone, and the web, and other devices as well, but those are the main ones we focus on. And so live framework, we talk about it as the unified way, the uniform way for programming live services. from a variety of really any platform, whether you are on the web, whether you are on the client, whether you're using an MS stack or a non-Microsoft stack, whether you are an HTTP REST guy, whether you're a JavaScript guy, .NET guy, PHP guy, doesn't matter. Whether you like to build your front end in Ajax or Silverlight or Flash, all are welcome to the party. Can you imagine if we only did this for the Microsoft stack? That'd just be ridiculous, considering that half the devices I use every day don't run on the Microsoft stack. And many devices probably never, might never will. And including, so when it comes to hardware devices, again, Windows, non-Windows, the 3 key elements to keep in mind that we'll spend a bunch of time on in this talk are on the cloud runtime and the RESTful APIs we expose, the client runtime, which enables you to program on Windows against Live, and a set of API libraries and controls that make it easier to interact with Live from whatever development stack you choose to use. In terms of what it's great for, we talked about Live Framework as being awesome for building these consumer-oriented applications that really integrate social, data, devices, applications, and people into web and client apps, and really making it simple to work with rich user data, of which we have a lot of on your behalf. So what can you do with Live Framework? Just a few ideas, and then we'll just spend the rest of the time in sort of code showing you how this works. You can access information on users' devices that we manage for you. You can access a user's social graph, that massive 40 billion nodes that we have. You can access people's profiles and presence. We know a lot about people, assuming, of course, they permit you to do that. It enables your application to sync its data and settings across multiple devices in the cloud. We provide rich access control mechanism. We have news and feeds and activities. Think of it very similar to Facebook, What's New feeds. We provide you synchronization facilities of just user data or your own, sharing facilities, and of course, full access to a user store. Now, instead of telling you all about that, which we can, I can tell you, I can spend hours and hours telling you about what it can do, I thought I'll just show you. And what I have for us today to play with is I built a really simple console app. Well, a WinForms console, as I call it. I didn't want to build all the UI from scratch. Usually, I much prefer to do this the file new project way. But that'd be way too much code to write. We're literally just going to go spend a ton of time writing code so you can see and get a look at the look and feel. In this console app, we're literally going to go through each of the major pillars of Live Framework and show you what the code looks like to be able to do things like work with people's devices, look at all the objects they have, create new objects, work with files, work with news, upload and download resources, work with contacts, profiles, notifications. And I'm literally just going to wire up. Each of these controls have literally no code behind. It's just code for us to write now. We'll write it from scratch, show you how it works. And the reason I picked these specific elements is most of them represent exactly the UI that you will see in our applications. And many of our apps, like if you ever use Live Mesh, the entire Live Mesh user experience is built on top of Live Framework. And by the time we're done with this console, you'll have about 80% of the code that's in our application written. And you just need to find some really good designer to make it look not so ugly, and you're done. So let's get going. The first thing we're going to do is make a connection to Live Framework. Virtually every application you'll write will have to start with a connect method. So for that, let's go ahead and do LiveFX, new live operating environment, call the connect method. There's lots of different ways to connect to Live Framework. You can use delegated auth. You can use different types of tickets or credentials. In this particular case, we're going to use just my creds that I've saved for us. Now, even though we're going to do this in WinForms and C#, the thing to keep in mind, and you'll see this at the end of the talk, you could be doing this from ASP.NET, from Silverlight, from JavaScript, from Python, whatever your favorite stack looks like. This is just easiest to demo in this type of session. So we're going to connect to LiveFX, and then let's just do message box, tell us we're ready to go. All right, so once we connect, the next thing we want to wire up, let's find out what are all the devices I have in my mesh. So for that, super simple. For each device in my mesh, and you'll notice we're going to go to the entries collection. That's because everything in Live Framework is represented in a feed. Feed have entries. You'll see the resource model later on. Now I can just do list box, don't remember the name of it, IntelliSense, items.add D. And let's hit F5. All right, so while that's running, let's actually take a look at all the devices I have. So if you look at the list of devices I have in my mesh currently, there's about, well, like 8 or 9 of them or something. So if we go back to the console, and I click load on this, there's all the devices I have. A dev machine, my media center, my smartphone in the demo, and these 4 Ori Amiga machine. These are literally the devices that I have And this view is literally just a pretty carousel over that exact same feed that we just coded against. We just didn't make ours pretty. So that's how easy it is to get at my devices. And let's see what it takes to figure out what are all the objects that are currently stored in my mesh. So for that, let's go ahead and implement a method to load all my mesh objects. Like a mesh, think of a mesh object as almost it's the base unit of synchronization and replication of data in the mesh, but it's almost like the base type. So if you see a live folder in your mesh, that's a folder where you synchronize data across your devices. It's just a type of a mesh object that happens to have some unique characteristics. But you can have lots of other kinds of objects that you can create. So for that same exact thing, you can enumerate through all the mesh objects you have in your mesh. Mesh.meshObjects, entries, and populate this list box that we have. Just as easy. Now, if I wanted to create a new mesh, whoa, that's interesting. Mouse went crazy. Well, very interesting. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that did. Nice KVM. Please stay with us. So let's take a look at what mesh objects I currently have in my mesh. So I have a live folder in here, my music, my photos, my videos, and a couple of other. These are just the ones that you can visualize as a live folder. We probably have a bunch of other ones. Let's take a look. So load them up. There we go. So we have, I have a British Airways mesh object. The EPGs, the Electronic Programming Guide you saw in Media Center. There's my device core object, my photos. They're all in here. It's that easy to get at them. All right, so let's go to try to create one of these and wire up the create button. It's as you'd expect. Take a mesh object, new one up. Different types of constructors we have. You can give them a title. You can do them based on other entries. For this particular one, let's grab the list box. Actually, it's a text box in there. Mesh object title.text. And once I create my new mesh object, I can just add it to my mesh. So livefx .mesh.meshObjects.add. We'll add this new one and see what that does. Oh, don't ask. Don't ask, please. Huge battles. You wouldn't believe how many months it took us to decide whether to do this by ref or not. That's what happens when you put too many smart people in the same room and nobody can agree on why you would do it. So you just end up with something that takes it by ref. You make me very unhappy. They got very happy. Let's wait for the connection. Let's load all our mesh objects, create a new one. Let's say my mix mesh object. Create it. Give it a second. Oh, of course, I didn't clear the list box, so when I load this, we're going to load all of them again. And there's a new mesh object I created. Now, a mesh object, interestingly enough, we'll see these later when we look at the resource model, but if you take a look at the shape of this thing, there's a lot of interesting things you can do with a mesh object. It has a mappings collection where it allows you to map them onto devices and have its data magically synchronized. It has a members collection where you can add members to do access control over who can access this data. It has news. It has all sorts of interesting feeds that you can work with to create some pretty cool apps. All right, so let's take a look now at data feeds. So data feeds, every mesh object has multiple data feeds where we store data and files associated with it. So if you think about a live folder, if I go back in here and you take a look at my photos, the photos is a mesh object, and now all these files actually live in a feed. And let's take a look at what it takes to get all these files. So for that, let's actually load all the files for this mesh object. We need to get first the mesh object that we select. So let's grab the mesh object selected in the in the list box. Selected item, I think it is. And now we can do something like, let's find a data feed. So data feed d equals m.data feeds. Now, there's lots of different ways to get a data feeds. The live folders have a specific data feed called live mesh files where we store all the files. And so I could do a get by title. This is an extension method I have for us. I think it's live mesh files. I think that's how it is. So let's get the specific one. And now for each file in there, in the entries collection, let's go ahead and add it to the list. So listbox files.items.add. There we go. And see what this does. So theoretically, if we look at photos, there should be 1, 2, 3, 4. There should be 9 photos. Let's give it a second to connect. All right. load all the mesh objects. Let's find the My Photos one, load all the data feed files. There we go. So there's the 9 JPEGs that are in there, and that's literally as easy as it is to navigate the resource model to find even a particular file. Now, files are interesting because all the metadata for a file, if you think about what they look like in an Atom feed or an RSS feed, right? You have all the metadata, the name and the size and all that, they'll be stored in the entry. And then you actually have the blob, the bits itself that are stored in an enclosure or a media resource. So before we get to the media resource, let's try, enumeration is easy, but what you want to do, what you really want to do in your apps is most of the time you want to be querying because the data sets could be huge and you typically don't want everything. So let's see what it takes to query and filter over the resource model. So let's implement a quick filter over files. And what we'll do is let's find data entries by size, which I think will be the easiest way to do this. So let's grab the mesh object and the data feed we have, and instead of enumerating, we'll send in a query. And the way we're going to do that, let's clear the list box, because we're going to have to query lots of times. Now, if you're doing this in managed code, the way you'd expect to send in queries is using link. And so let's generate a new link query. In this particular query, we'll do from, for every data entry, in the data feed. This keyboard is terrible. Let's see. Give me 1 second. 40, I think it's in the way we want to do this. For each data entry and all the entries we have, where the data entry, I think it's resource. It's a big resource model. Let's find all the media resources. Length property. They'll tell you how large this media resource is. And let's take it. We'll take the filter from the text box. So we could do something like this. System.convert. We have to get this as an int. To int32. And let's take the filter text box text. And then we'll just select the data entry. Now it's as easy as enumerate over the rest of this in the query. Oh. And just add this to the list box again. All right, so what did we do here? Items.add D2. There we go. Okay, a little bit more code, but much more interesting to send in queries. And of course, if you're writing managed code, doing link over this resource model is quite beautiful. The way it really works is, of course, our backends don't understand link, but what we do is we take these link queries, transform and translate them into using URI or link to URI mappings, and you end up with these queries that we can send to the backends, and they'll respond with the right response. So let's try to find all the photos that are, let's say, less than 30,000. Oh, there aren't any. All right. There we go. There's one photo. There's all the photos. Literally that easy to create a query. And of course, queries work. The idea is that we want to make them more consistent, just like all the other types, notifications, extensibility, consistent across all the types. So if you want to query contacts or objects or devices or profiles, queries work the same no matter what data type you're working with. So that's querying. Let's see what it takes to actually add new data into using Live Framework. And what we'll do is we'll upload a new photo into my photo collection and see how easy that is. So we'll do an upload button. And to do the upload button, we have an open file dialog box already on the form. So we'll find some photo locally on my machine, and then we'll send it up. And to do that, let's go grab the mesh object again and the data feed for the files. And it's as easy as doing data entries. We're going to add a new data entry. And the way we're going to do that is actually read the file from the file system and stream it up. So file.openRead. And I think we can just get the open file dialog box, grab the file name. We can give it a silly name and a slug. Okay, let's try that. So we'll add a new photo in here. We'll add a 10th photo and see if it actually uploads and if it's usable. Let's load all the mesh objects, find my photos, load the feed. Let's upload a new picture. These are all not that exciting. Turtle. All right, so we'll wait for the turtle to get uploaded. Oh, we gave it a wrong extension, so I can't actually view it. Well, we'll fix that. There we go. Well, if it was actually of the right extension, you'd actually be able to see it. So let's try that again. And again, the idea is to give you, in the managed wrappers, which is what we're using, the managed API framework over the RESTful APIs, is to make it as natural for a managed code developer. Of course, if you use the JavaScript kit, it doesn't really look anything like this. All the methods are much more natural to a JavaScript developer. So let's take a look at this one more time. Photos, load, upload. How about we pick the whale? All right. So this guy will show up, and hopefully we can preview it in here. There we go. And that's a photo that we picked from the file system, got uploaded to the cloud. It's in the data center. Now it's synchronizing anywhere that this folder shows up, and we'll be able to retrieve it on other devices or from other services as well. All right. So we did files, photos, devices, feeds, mesh objects. Let's do news. News are interesting. Think of news as we have both object scope news, which are what's going on with this particular object that your application can use, and we also have news that are more global to the user. And the global news system doesn't quite work as you'd think it does. We have all these massive filters in place to try to understand what are all the most relevant news to a user at a global level, because not every news item. I imagine your Facebook news feed populated your sort of your mini feed, your what's new with everything that was going on in the world. You never use it because there'll be information overload. And so your application, while it can use its own news feeds on its own mesh objects, only certain data gets bubbled up to a user. So if you want to load all the news associated with a particular object, again, of course, they're just feeds. And so you can take the mesh object we're selecting, and for every news item in that mesh object, you can enumerate through it and find the news box. And let's add all the news. And again, it's that easy. And let's take a look at what news we have here today. So we've got, if you look at, on the right side, today's, I added some pictures, I deleted some pictures. And so that same news feed that shows up in our UI will show up in our console. So let's load the photos feed, and let's load all the news, and there they are. Now, the reason they look like this, and you can't kind of see all of them, is because news feeds are templatized in the sense that on every type of activity, there's sort of three key elements, right? There is the actor, the person that took the action. So Ori added a picture. There's an action I took, added, and there's an object, like a particular picture. And for localization reasons and to make these much more manageable, we have these templates that are built in that you get to program against, which make it much easier to work with news. So if you want to create a new news item, I'll show you what that looks like. It's pick that mesh object again. And we have, again, in the kit, in the managed kit, there's all these nice overloads. So you can do something like this. You can add a news message and just say, hello from Mix. And when we do that, we basically will take that, we'll templatize it in what's called the user post. We'll fill in all the right things for you on behalf of your application. We'll post it into the news feed. It'll get aggregated, computed, synchronized. And you can, again, pick up this news feed, the new item you added, by going directly to the cloud or to any device that synchronized the object that's related to this news feed. So if you want to create a new one, oh, I fixed the text, so let's do that. And if we go back up here, in a few seconds, once the message gets sort of passed through the whole system and aggregated, it'll show up in this news feed for us. And if we load this guy, there's the user message. We can't see the text from it, but it'll show up in the UI in a few seconds. All right, so let's take a look at what it takes to work with other types of media resources, like the pictures we just uploaded, when you want to retrieve them from the cloud or from the client. And for that, let's load this picture in here. And what we'll do is we'll grab the mesh objects that we picked. Actually, probably do something even easier than that. Let's take a new data entry. And the data entry is the unit that you get to work with inside a feed. So you go from mesh objects to a data feed to a data entry to a media resource. So we can take the data entry that's in the files list box. I don't need that. There we go. So this is the currently selected file. And then we can take the picture box, and we can set its image to be, I think you can just do new bitmap take the data entry, and I think we have a there we go, read media resource method. Now, basically what we're going to do is stream the media resource from the cloud or from the client, depending on where you're connected, right into this picture box. The reason that's convenient, of course, we'll do all the work on your behalf, and if you weren't doing a sloppy demo, then you'd be doing try-catch around it, doing it asynchronously, all the good stuff. But for this demo, this would suffice. So let's find all the photos. Let's find a particular picture. We liked the hand glider. Where is he? There he is. Click load, and there's the picture that we literally just retrieved from our data center. So if you pick a different data entry, click load, we'll go and fetch that media resource on behalf of your app, do all the right chunking and caching, which is great. All right, so we did devices, objects, feeds, files, news, media resources, filtering, queries. Let's take a look at contacts. One of the most, as we call it, a very highly coveted data type. This is people's social graph that you can mine, not just their first order, but their second order graph as well. So for that, we can do something as simple, again, for every contact in my contact collection, and go through it one by one and grab the list box we have for contacts and add each one. Now, a contact is interesting, but contacts profiles are even more interesting. We have a huge number of profiles and all this data that users keep with us, and if they permit your application to access their profile data, you can do cool stuff like this. So let's take a look at a couple of things. One, a user's interests, or you can take their personal status message from Messenger or anything like that, and their profile picture. So let's grab the contact we select. So take the list box of contacts, that selected item, and we can get their list of interests. So I have a text box that we can put their interests in. And I think that comes from, let's see, so let's go to the profiles collection, get the About You profile, and find your list of interests. And then we have another picture box for the profile picture. Dot image equals, I think I can just do new bitmap. Let's find their profile picture. I think get thumbnail image. There we go. That's it. So let's go actually take a look at my real contacts, so we're not cheating. So these are my live contacts. There's Alan, Cassie. Let's find somebody. Well, let's look at Kelly's profile. So Kelly's got a picture, and her lists of interests are shopping and hanging out with friends. Not terribly exciting or original, but let's use that. So we'll connect. Oh, we're connected already. Let's load all my contacts. Let's find Kelly, load her profile, and there's her profile and there's her picture, which makes it really easy for your app to understand what users I have in my social graph. You can ask them, you can build contact pickers to pick these users. You can see what they're doing. You can add data, assuming the app allows you to, etc. So the last thing we'll do is wire up a notification, and that will be it for the crash course. So the notification we'll add is once we connect or a new mesh object is created, let's let our app be notified. So you can do something like this. Of course, the way you'd expect this to work is using beautiful plus equals style syntax, a new event handler. This is an event handler that'll tell us when a new mesh object is created, and we could do something really simple, like let's just grab the sender and see who that is. And the reason that is really nice, because now you don't have to sit there and do all the polling against the data types and against the resource model on your own. Right? You don't have to sit there going, is anything changed, anything changed? You can just subscribe to the events that are of interest to you, for example, when a device goes offline or something like that, and to get the notifications. So let's get connected. And in here, we'll put the name of the sender. Give it a second. There we go. Let's create a new test mesh object. And there we go. It tells you that a new mesh object was created, who the sender was, and again, you can go follow up and find out exactly what data changed and what happened there. So, I'm almost out of breath, almost. So there you go. In about, I don't know, that was 15 minutes or so of coding, you learned how you can easily program against users' devices, mine their social graph, work with your own custom objects, work with files, upload, download, get notifications, etc., which honestly super convenient. Now, we only did this for managed code, and I promise we'll do some more non-managed code stuff in a minute. Now, let's talk about the hard problems. Some of that stuff looks pretty easy and straightforward, but what are the problems we're really solving for you? Well, one, of course, is the foundation problem. And the foundation problem is all about the fact that you need a cloud at the core of all of this to make it work. You can't just run this stuff on a single device. We got one for you. The next hard problem is what we refer to as the identity problem. And it's not just identities. Somebody was mentioning OpenID and OAuth, et cetera. It's not just identity around people. It's identity for people, devices, and applications. And for each one of these, there are really two dimensions to identity issues. There are authentication, which is the who you are problem, and the authorization is the what you can do problem. So you want to authenticate and authorize people, devices, and apps in this world in different ways, and that's hard. The universal representation problem. So we have all this data that we store, billions of pieces of data. How do you make it accessible to any kind of application in a uniform way? And of course, in a natural way, so it looks the right way in managed code, the right way in JavaScript, the right way in PHP, et cetera. Then you have a devices problem. You got to manage topology. You got to know what devices are available, what's online, what's offline, which you can manage, which you can access. That's hard. Synchronization. And synchronization, a lot of people confuse sync and offline. They're really not the same thing. Data synchronization is fundamentally about bringing data closer to your app and closer to sort of the people who want to use it. And what I mean by that is the reason we sync data a lot of time is for performance, convenience, using local resources. It's always cheaper to store stuff locally than in the cloud. And it has a fringe benefit of being available when you're offline. So if you use Outlook every day, right, Outlook synchronizes your entire mailbox locally, and the app, 90% of its calls go to the local store for performance reasons and to sort of offload load from the backends. And that's nice, you can take it offline. That's a hard problem. Sharing is hard. How do you distribute data between users and really manage permissions and sharing boundaries? State is incredibly hard. If you think about the type of awareness your application has to have, and there's kind of two different main types of states, right? There is persistent state, but there's a lot of sort of ephemeral state or transient state, like what devices are going online, what users are living in which folder, working on what object, et cetera. That's hard. And of course, communications, making it seamless for you to work with peer-to-peer, cloud-assisted relay, et cetera. These are all really, really, really tough platform problems that the last thing you want as a developer, of course, is to solve these on your own for every app that you build. Nor do we want you to spend your time sort of focused on your business logic, not building plumbing. So live framework, you already saw a lot of it. If you think about it as the universal way to program live services from a variety of platforms, programming languages, applications, and devices, what does it look like? At the bottom, we have what we call sort of the live operating environment that we run in the cloud. And the things it does for you around cloud, CRUD, create, read, update, delete support against our resources, scripting, caching, analytics, synchronization, and all the auth work. We have a version of the live operating environment that runs on your desktop, the client live operating environment, which does very similar things and also does P2P, local integration with the file system, and everything we need to do to connect the device, Windows device, a PC, a Mac, or a phone to the cloud. On top of the live operating environment, we have a fairly large resource model you already started seeing a little earlier in the demo that has both all the data that a user owns, like their profiles, their calendars, their groups, their files, et cetera, a bunch of things that we represent in the resource model, like their presence and news feeds. And then we support a base level of operation across the entire resource model. So we support CRUD for create, read, update, delete operations, URI to link mappings, resource scripting for batching, triggers, auth, introspection. So you can actually, if you ask for the options verb in your request, you'll get basically a discoverable way you can introspect into the resource model to discover new things as they show up. And then we have the interaction protocols like AtomPub and FeedSync, but of course the wire representations. And the interesting thing about the wire representation is, of course, every other day some other monkey in the world invents another interesting one that we all have to adopt. And so we support very flexible architecture to allow us to render the resource model in Atom or JSON or POX, and I'll show you these in a second. Now, on top of the resource model, a RESTful resource model is great. But it's much nicer when it comes with a rich set of libraries. We have libraries for managed code, Silverlight, ASP.NET, and .NET Framework on the desktop, JavaScript for people who build Ajax apps. And of course, there'll be more and more of these API kits that we expect both we'll create them, and then the community we fully expect will create a whole bunch of kits. Now, to finish this picture, Microsoft always complements its platform with a great tool set. So we have Visual Studio integration. We have a developer portal that you as a developer can go to and provision your application, get an app ID, sort of build that relationship with us where you can manage all your interactions in one place. We have a great set of offerings in the portal around analytics, which is a particularly fascinating area. And we do two kinds of styles of analytics. We do analytics that are internal to us, so we can see what your applications are doing, what kind of load you put in the system, and how we should continuously improve and grow the cloud based on what your apps are actually doing. But we also have a set of analytics we're working on that we will be exposing to you as a developer, so you can tell what your application, your users are doing. And the types, when you have a user base as large as ours, we can actually tell you some really interesting things. I can tell you, for example, what percentage of your users are US-based, or come from Japan, or live in Brazil, because we know all this data. We can tell you how many devices users have, what kinds of devices they own. We can tell you what other services they're using. We can tell you how often they're using what. And so you can ask, you can look at our analytics system, including how many API calls your app is making to us, et cetera. But we have a huge amount of data that could be very useful to a developer. And if you ever use Squim on Windows, think of it as like Squim on steroids in the cloud, which is actually quite exciting, and a lot of interesting business opportunities around analytics that we'll talk more about. So the stacks we support, obviously this is not a Microsoft stack only thing. And why would we go and make sure that the system can be used from Ruby or PHP or Python or Perl or A or whatever? The reason it's super important to us, like I said, is because the types of applications we want people to build and use every day really need to span whatever they choose to use in their day-to-day life. And if they chose apps that are not built on the Microsoft stack, great. Of course, Microsoft stack apps will work awesome, but we might as well make sure that the platform is highly usable from these other stacks. So let's take a look at the resource model, and I'll show you literally what it looks like on the wire in a second. Now, when we started the resource model, the problem, as I was mentioning earlier, the problem we had to face is how to represent all this data in a way that is easy to use and available to all kinds of applications. And funny enough, when we probably put, 6 or 7 people in a room when we started this project to think about how we should do this resource model, and you can imagine, we had, SQL experts and guys with, 15 years Windows experience and web experts, and you stick these guys in the room, and the SQL guy goes to the board, and guess what he starts drawing, SQL style, tables, link queries over that, like very, very SQL-oriented resource model. And you go to the web guy, and he's like, "You're crazy. What is this crap? Like, it really should look like this." Then you go to the Windows guy, and he looks at it. He's like, "This doesn't make any sense to a Windows developer." And then, of course, you get the data center guy, our ops guys that look at this crap that the guys are drawing on the board and going, "You're all insane. This will never run in the data center." And so the model we ended up with actually turns out to be the simplest and, I think, the most elegant one. We chose a model that the web community has already voted with its feet they like, and that is the feed-based model. So everything in the resource model is based on a data entry. Just like if you ever used an RSS feed or an Atom feed, they all have entries. Every data entry can be associated with a media resource, which is a place to hold blob data as opposed to metadata. You can have lots of data entries, and you can relate them to each other. So we have a very simple relationship model using URIs. You can take multiple data entries and put them in a feed. There's a collection of entries and metadata and blobs. You can take multiple data feeds. This is where we start to become more live unique. You can take multiple data feeds and put them in a mesh object. So a mesh object is a container, lots of feeds, lots of entries, lots of media resources. And then we came up with a whole bunch of unique feeds to the system. So the system, like a mesh object, as you saw before, has a members feed. And a members feed says this is literally where we put ACLs. So if you want to share a particular, let's say you take a live folder, where we had a bunch of photos. That live folder is a mesh object. All the photos metadata are in feeds and entries, and all the actual JPEGs and the media resources. If I want to add my mom to share this folder with me, I literally take the my mom object, and I put her as a data entry in the members feed. And I give her a read role, and now she's permitted to read data. The mappings feed essentially tells us onto which devices do I want all this data synchronized. So I can take my smartphone, and I can add the smartphone as a data entry in the mappings feed, and that will tell the system to synchronize all the metadata and data to that device. News feeds, subscription feeds, you get the idea. But everything looks and feels the same. Then you take a bunch of mesh objects, and you put them in the root, which is the mesh. You add a bunch of other kinds of feeds in there. So there's a devices feed, which you'll see in a second. This is where all the devices I own live. Global news feeds, notification queues. You add profiles, contacts, calendar, scripts, and you get our resource model. So what does this actually look like on the wire? Let's take a look. In the SDK, you'll actually find a neat little tool called the resource model browser. And the resource model browser is a glorified web control that literally lets you see what you're getting back from the live operating environment on the cloud or on the client. And I'll show you both. So let's connect to the cloud first. And I'll zoom this a bit. So check out this URL we're on. We're on userctp.windows.net. Everything in the Azure platform is on windows.net, and since everything here is oriented around a user, everything a user owned, we are at user.windows.net and CTP since it's currently in CTP. So in the root, you'll see there's a mesh node, scripts, there's a profiles node, there's a contacts node in the feed, and you're looking literally at an Atom feed at the root. This is the service document. If you navigate into my mesh, you'll see a bunch of other feeds. There's the devices feed. So if we look at the devices feed, there's my dev machine, and this is literally, like if you're looking at this view, this is an Ajax app. It's built in JavaScript. That's literally just a pretty representation of this exact feed that's coming to it on the wire. Now, this is an Atom. The guys who wrote our web app are JavaScript guys, and so what they do is they literally ask for the response to be in JSON format. So you can ask the cloud operating environment to literally give you JSON back, and this is literally the same exact code as what's powering our own apps. There's no private APIs for them. They just call and render over this feed. If you're not a JSON guy and you want POX, you can ask for plain old XML, which is cool. If you want RSS, you can literally take an RSS reader as long as you can authenticate and point it at an endpoint and render all the data. So if we look at, let's find all my mesh objects. Where are they? There we go. So in here, let's do this in Atoms a little easier. Let's find the photos one. So there's my photos. Let's look at this entry. So it has a title called My Photos. It has a description. This is the My Photos folder we've been looking at. There's the author. I created this. And here's the feeds we talked about. So there's data feeds, members feeds, mapping feeds. Let's actually grab the data feeds one. And notice it's all very easily navigatable. There's that special feed we worked with, the live mesh files feed, which has a data entries feed and a feed sync feed if you want to use feed sync to synchronize with this object. And now you can literally see each entry. There's the entry we created just now, mypixpic.jpg. And it has a thumbnail, whether it's web ready, it's got profiles about the author, is it in the middle of upload. All the data and metadata you need around this exists in here. Now, hopefully you're asking yourself, but wait a minute. This is all in the cloud. Like, how am I going to continue to use this resource model if I'm building a client application that doesn't want to talk to the cloud all the time, that wants to use local resources? Well, the way that this works is, let me go home. Notice you can connect to the local live operating environment. Then take a look at this URL. We actually serve up that same exact resource model off of the local endpoint at localhost. Our client runtime opens up an HTTP port. You get to talk to, if you want to use Atom or JSON or whatever, that's cool as well. Of course, most native apps would be using whatever native language that platform supports, Win32, managed code, whatever. But the same resource model we essentially project on the client, and you can work with all the data types that are synchronized to this device. All the data that's available locally is available at this endpoint. So if I go to, let's navigate into Mesh. Let's look at all my devices. So my local client knows all the devices I own. And there they are. It's the exact same feed that you got talking to the cloud you get on the client. And of course, you can come and you can program again using JSON against the client. Now, if you look at here's an interesting one. If you look at the mesh object for photos, I did not ask for the photos object. Let's find it. I did not ask for the photos object to be synchronized to this machine. However, the metadata for this object still exists, so my application can discover it. But if I look at the files feed for it, it doesn't exist because the actual blobs, the photos, are not being synchronized to this machine. If I go to this feed and I add this device into the mappings feed, within a few seconds, all the data will come locally, and then I'll be able to access all the data right off of the local endpoint. And this enables you to really control what data for a user goes to which device, because you probably don't want all your videos synchronizing to your smartphone. And if you're using this to synchronize your Windows app settings, so if let's say you were Firefox and you wanted to use the system to easily synchronize your favorites for Firefox across all your machines, well, you might not need to synchronize favorites on machines that don't support Firefox. And so you can use this system very flexibly to move around app data, user data settings just in the right way. Let me do one other quick thing. Let's actually go and launch How many people have ever used IronPython or Python at all? Anybody ever use Python? Love Python. So just to show you, this is an IronPython console. Of course, you could do this with a normal one. Let me import this tiny little library that is probably like 20 lines in it. And now I can do livefx equals. We're just going to connect to the live operating environment. And the reason I'm showing you this, you saw a managed app, you saw the resource model. Let me show you just a Python random console app. I can literally do in Python something like this. For I in livefx.mesh. Wow, that's loud. Dot devices dot entries and print I dot resource dot title. And there's all the devices in my mesh. And so if you're a Python guy and you like scripting or command line stuff, just as easy to get at these things as if you were a JavaScript developer or whatever. So that's pretty cool. That shows you sort of the universal accessibility of the resource model. Oh, let's not do this slide again. So that's the resource model, the thing that really sort of powers livefx. So to wrap up real quick, and we'll touch on a couple of other things. Live services really are this foundational set of building blocks that we use for our consumer-oriented applications. And if you look at our apps, Messenger being a hugely popular app that uses relay authentication, peer-to-peer, contacts, profiles, that app is built completely on the live services that we run in the data center. Hotmail, the largest, one of the largest services on the planet. All these consumer-oriented apps, we use live services in-house to power, and our goal is to transform it into a platform for you to be able to use and leverage. Live Framework, today these services are pretty complicated to program against. By design, their scale requirements are unbelievable, but our goal is to make them available for you to program easily using Live Framework. Our goal, again, is to make them always universally accessible to any stack. Some stacks will be easier, but net, everybody's welcome to the party. We'll give you a bunch of API kits for the most popular platforms. We think they're awesome for building web apps, but we actually anticipate quite a large amount of uptake for client applications as well. And whether you're building a hybrid app, like a Silverlight app that runs out of browser, locally using cache data, you can imagine all the possibilities you get here, because you get a system that's synchronizing data for you, lets you tap into all the user's existing stuff, really powerful stuff. We have a CTP that we've opened a few months ago. Actually, all of you can just go to the CTP and sign up today, and you'll get instant access to play with it. It's still in a sandbox. The stuff is very, very, very young. And so we've isolated it into a developer sandbox where you get to go play. You can break stuff. We don't really be gentle, but you can break stuff and nothing bad will happen in the world since real users are isolated from this. And over time, we'll onboard more and more of these capabilities over the production data. There's a bunch of resources in the slide decks for you to find where to learn more, where to get the SDKs, forums, blogs, etc. And I'll leave this slide up. And did I finish just in time? I wanted to leave 15 minutes or so for questions. So with that, let me say thank you very much and invite you all to come up to the stage or to the mic and ask questions. Thanks. Right, you can feel free to shout out any questions you have, and I'll repeat them if you don't want to go to the mic, if you're shy. Go ahead.
What's the new stuff around virtual Earth you guys are looking at?
What's the new stuff around virtual Earth? I think, I could be wrong, but I think there's actually a session on VE. The stuff you'll find out, we've been doing a lot of very cool work with the virtual Earth SDKs to allow you to program using Silverlight. I don't want to steal their thunder. It's super snazzy stuff. You should go check out that session.
Actually, two questions. Is the storage size going to increase? What's going to be available for that?
Yep.
Is this going to potentially be commercial?
Yeah, so first question was around storage size and whether we'll increase it. And the second one was about commercial availability. So around storage, today, if you're in the CTP, I believe you get 5 gigs of data per user. The nice thing is you have to think of cloud storage on 2 different dimensions. There's cloud storage that we provision for you as a developer. And if you use the Windows Azure services, basically you pay for how much storage you as a developer in an application usage. In the live model, because everything is oriented around a user, storage is really segmented by the quota that user has. So some users have 5 gigs, some users have 25 gigs, and it all depends on the type of account they have with us. And you as a developer get access, responsible access to that quota. with a user permitting you to store data on their behalf. And so there it really depends. Some users will have more, some users will have less. You can assume that over time, the amount of storage that people will need in the cloud grows. But storage, storage and egress are two of the most expensive things we do in the data center. And so the more data you can distribute to devices and use P2P to move that data around and not burden the cloud, literally you can see the dollars draining out of our bank account as you use on such a massive system. It's different. If you have 10 million users on your service, that's great. Do whatever you want. If you have 500 million users in your system like ours, like every byte counts. So good question. Did you raise your hand? Other question. Oh, sorry, commercial availability. I didn't answer that question. Like I mentioned, we just put out the CTP a couple of months ago. It was isolated to just a very small number of developers. This week, we're opening up to a lot more, so all of you can go and sign up and get free accounts. We haven't announced any dates of when you can go commercial. The gate we're really using there is to sort of see how the system is handling the types of applications and traffic patterns that your apps are generating. We have a very good understanding of our own apps that have been using this, for 10 years. It took us a long time to sort of tweak all the right knobs to make sure that the system is running healthily on such scale. We need a bunch more time to figure out how your apps are affecting the system. And once we're comfortable with that, you'll see us starting to roll out for usage. Of course, the goal is to go to production. It's just a matter of time. Question?
Okay, so OpenID.
Yes.
Thinking LiveID, OpenID, all of that. Say somebody doesn't want to be on Microsoft.
Totally.
They're PHP and they just want to use the cloud.
Totally. OpenID, OAuth. Let me say three things.
What's the upgrade path to OpenID?
So let's talk about identity in general. So if you're a web app today wanting to talk to our stuff, you actually do not have to really, quote unquote, adopt LiveID as that web developer. Your users, we support a model called delegated auth. And delegated auth says very similar to OAuth. It's just our own way. It's got some, it's more powerful in some ways. It's been around for longer. And there, your website essentially, when a user shows up, we ask if you ask us to get access to, let's say, their contacts. They say, yes, I allow your application. And what you'll get back from us is a delegated auth token that you get to store with your own user identity system, any system you want to use, OpenID or other. You just store this token from us, and anytime you make calls to our cloud, you supply the token, and we'll grant you access to the data. So you don't actually have to have users signing into your website or fully adopt LiveID in that sense. Your users have to have LiveID, which of course they do if their data is stored with us. Now on OpenID and OAuth, we actually have a session in the conference. I think it's Jorgen session about protecting online identities. We've been working a lot. We're in the same division, the same group as the LiveID team. We spend a lot of time with them on the upgrade path to wiring up OpenID, and we're thinking through what it really means to support OAuth. With some challenges with OAuth, it's not quite as powerful and flexible as what we have today in place, but obviously as an open standard, something we're looking at. Jorgen would actually be able to tell you a lot more about it, but it's definitely a route, again, in the notion of being open and universally accessible. We got to make sure that the right identity systems are supported and not just ours. Fundamentally, anything that appropriately protects users' data and users' privacy, great. And we just need to sort of work through the motions of can we really protect it appropriately. We're pretty stringent about that kind of stuff. Another question.
Yeah, there seems to be a little bit of overlap with some other existing products that are planning to integrate with things like SharePoint or Team System.
Overlap with existing products and specifically SharePoint and Team System. Help me just try to make sure I understand. Like when you think of overlap with Team System or SharePoint, for example, give me.
Like Team System and Presence and knowing who's online.
Yep.
SharePoint, even bigger than that, sharing files and also Presence.
Gotcha. So on that respect, let me say two things. We have sort of the back-end systems that we use to store data, and they're all sort of designed for particular scenarios, like live storage systems for live stuff, like et cetera. And on the back end, we're doing, over time, we've been unifying a lot of the back-end systems to actually use the same type of scaled-out storage mechanisms to put all the stuff in the same place. That is usually abstracted completely away from a developer or an end user. You don't know what we're doing there to make it efficient and safe and scalable. On the programming, and so that's at the bottommost layer. The highestmost layer is the end user experience you get around storage. So if you put stuff in your SharePoint Online stuff versus stuff in your SkyDrive, for example, or in Mesh or whatever, I think, my personal opinion, there will always be different user experiences optimized for different scenarios to get at that data. Now you have the middle layer, where sort of the API and sort of business logic layer of who controls what. And there with SharePoint specifically, it's nothing I can tell you today about what we're doing there, but you should assume that just like we've rationalized a lot of our back-end investments of how we store and how we scale out just makes good sense, and you see us doing more and more in terms of unification and rationalization on the user experience level, you can assume that middle-tier rationalization always happens, but it's always driven by other customer demand, whether it's a partner, developer, or an end user, or efficiencies in the data center. Obviously, we don't strive to have duplicate stuff, especially at this kind of scale. It used to be actually pretty easy to have multiples of everything when things were cheap to build. When things are this expensive to run and build, you kind of don't want to do that. So, and as you'll see from our APIs, let's say in Live Framework specifically, the reason you are getting a unified view, that's a huge customer ask all the time, that it was too confusing to consume 15 different things. Give us one thing we can think about and program against. And you'll see us doing more and more of that over time. But other questions? Anything else? Good. How many people are actually, you can be completely honest, how many people actually will go and check out the CTP? Awesome. Good. There's a really great set of forums and places for you to provide feedback. As hopefully Orville will tell you, we're actually very responsive on the forums. People listening will get responsive very quick. Virtually every comment you make shows up in our bug database for us to go through, and we literally go through every single one. That's one of the benefits of starting small and growing a community around it. We can still afford to do that, so any piece of feedback you give actually carries a lot of weight. Actually, many of you are very active, have more of a personal relationship with us. Like, I'll use you as an example. If you do lots of great stuff, you have an opportunity to really engage with us more deeply, both sort of face-to-face but also online. We always appreciate that, so do take the time if you are interested. If you have any other questions, I am my full name, oriamiga@microsoft.com. Feel free to send me any questions you have or post on the forums. My whole team sort of watches it. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks very much.